Sage Wren had one job. Don't sneeze while casting a simple magical amplification spell for the throne room's ancient wards. King Oliver Ashvane had one kingdom to run, a task that required a great deal of what his advisors called diplomatic nuance, and what he privately called lying through his teeth. Now, thanks to a cloud of pollen from a poorly placed bouquet of star lilies and a bout of hay fever that had been simmering all morning, the king couldn't stop telling people the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the soul-crushingly, internationally disastrous truth. Sage was currently stuck to his side like a bad omen with good intentions. And the worst part wasn't the simmering political tension, or the increasingly creative excuses she had to invent. It was that the king, in the middle of a private meeting with his treasurer, had just paused, turned to her, and announced to the small, horrified room, "Your hair smells like sunshine and rosemary, and I find it distracting in a way that feels suspiciously like hope." This was, to put it mildly, not in the job description. It had all started so promisingly. The day had dawned with a pleasant lack of impending doom, a rare treat in the capital. Sage had been summoned to the palace, her satchel of spell components clinking reassuringly at her side. She wasn't a master witch, not by a long shot. Her mentor, Maud, still referred to her as being in the enthusiastic but prone to magical combustion stage of her training. But this was a simple spell, a cantrip really. Reinforce the wards. A magical tune-up. Even she couldn't mess this up. She'd repeated that phrase to herself a dozen times on the walk over, a mantra against her own chaotic nature. The throne room was cavernous and intimidating, all high arches and tapestries depicting heroic, well-groomed wolves defeating things. The wards themselves were ancient, older than the current dynasty, woven into the stonework by the first wolf kings who'd used truth-binding enchantments to detect treachery in their court. The magic had long since settled into passive defense, but its bones were honest ones. Sage knew this because Maud had made her study the architectural grimoire twice before signing off on the job. "Know what you're poking before you poke it," Maud had said, which was about as sentimental as she ever got. At the far end of the room, on a throne that looked both majestic and profoundly uncomfortable, sat King Oliver Ashvane. He was exactly as advertised, broad-shouldered, with a jaw that looked like it had been carved from granite, and a severe expression that suggested he was mentally composing someone's eulogy. Dark hair, intense eyes that seemed to see right through you, and an aura of power that made the air feel thick. He was the Alpha King, the most powerful wolf shifter on the continent, and he looked thoroughly, deeply unimpressed with her. "You are the witch?" he'd asked, his voice a low rumble that vibrated in Sage's bones. It was a voice designed to command armies and make knees weak. Sage's knees felt appropriately wobbly, but she chalked it up to nerves. Mostly. "Sage Wren, Your Majesty," she'd said, executing a curtsy that was only slightly marred by her tripping over her own feet. She'd caught herself before she face-planted on the royal marble, a small victory. "Aunt Maud sent me, for the ward maintenance." The king's gaze flickered over her, from her slightly frayed robes to the sprig of lavender tucked behind her ear for luck. He didn't smile. Another Tuesday, another potentially incompetent magic user. The trade delegation from the south arrived next week. The western border skirmishes were escalating, and his wolf had been restless all morning, pacing behind his ribs like a caged animal, whining about something Oliver couldn't identify and didn't have time for. He'd told it to be quiet 4 times already. It had not been quiet. Now, as the witch stumbled through her curtsy, the wolf stopped pacing. Every hair on Oliver's body stood on end, deep in his chest, in the place where the wolf lived and dreamed and howled at moons Oliver pretended not to notice. Something vast and ancient and completely unreasonable reared up and announced, with the absolute certainty of a creature that had never been wrong about anything important. "Her. That one. Ours." Oliver blinked. The witch was rummaging in her satchel, muttering about silver powder. She had ink on her chin. There was a leaf in her hair that wasn't the lavender. She looked like a small academic disaster. "Perfect. She is perfect. Protect her. Feed her. Build her a den." Oliver told his wolf very firmly to shut up. There were border skirmishes to think about, trade delegations, the quarterly budget review. He was the Alpha King. He did not have time for whatever primal nonsense this was. She smells like sunlight and herbs and home. I have named her Sunhair. This is not a discussion. He gestured a hand dismissively. Proceed. Do not break anything. Sage's cheeks burned. I have a 94% success rate with non-combustible inanimate objects, Your Majesty. He raised a single unimpressed eyebrow. Reassuring. Tell her she has nice eyes. Oliver did not tell her she had nice eyes. He sat on his profoundly uncomfortable throne and projected kingly indifference while a creature inside him tried to compose love poetry with a vocabulary of approximately 40 words. She set to work and he watched her, purely for security purposes, he told himself, and the wolf laughed at him, which wolves shouldn't even be able to do. She laid out her components, powdered silver, a vial of morning dew, a pinch of dragon's breath pepper for potency. The air shimmered as she began to chant, the ancient words flowing smoothly. For a moment, she looked competent, confident, almost graceful. The wolf made a noise that could only be described as swooning. That was, of course, the precise moment a servant bustled in, carrying an enormous vase of freshly cut star lilies, their pollen puffing out in a fine, golden cloud. Sage's nose twitched. Oh no. The feeling was unmistakable, a tickle deep in her sinuses that promised utter mortification. She tried to clamp down on it, to hold the spell and the sneeze simultaneously. Her eyes watered. The ancient words of the cantrip began to warp. Potentia, defen, ah. She squeezed her eyes shut and turned her head away from her delicate spellwork, trying to aim the impending explosion at the floor. The sneeze ripped out of her, a great, ungraceful chew that echoed in the vast hall. In her haste, she turned directly towards the throne. The spell, twisted from a gentle reinforcement into something sharp and ballistic, shot from her hands in a bolt of shimmering, pepper-flecked light and hit King Oliver square in the chest. Here was the thing nobody warned young witches about. Intent matters, but so does infrastructure. The throne room wards were truth-bound at their core. Sage's spell had been designed to amplify and reinforce them. When the sneeze warped the cantrip and sent it careening into a living body instead of ancient stone, the magic didn't just fizzle. It adapted. The truth-binding resonance, meant to strengthen walls, found something much more interesting to bind to. He grunted, a flicker of surprise crossing his stony features. The light dissipated, leaving no mark. For a second, nothing happened. The servant with the flowers froze, wide-eyed. Sage froze, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. The king blinked. He looked down at his chest, then back at her. His expression was thunderous. Sunhair is in distress. Fix it. Comfort her. Nuzzle. What? Oliver said, ignoring the nuzzle suggestion with heroic effort, his voice dangerously low. Was that? Sage's mind was a frantic, screaming void. I shot the king. I shot the Alpha King with a sneeze spell. They're going to turn me into a toad. A very small, very disposable toad. An energetic miscalculation, Your Majesty, she stammered, her voice a squeak. A percussive anomaly in the incantation. Entirely unexpected. Just then, Lord Bromley, the master of royal protocol and the kingdom's foremost authority on genealogical records, bustled forward. He was a fussy man, meticulous in all things except the increasingly obvious toupee perched on his head like a nesting animal. Your Majesty, are you harmed? A dastardly magical assault. We must imprison this hedge witch at once. Oliver waved a hand, his eyes still fixed on Sage. He opened his mouth, likely to do just that, but what came out was something entirely different. I am unharmed, Bromley, and your flattery is as transparent as that wig you're wearing. Do you truly believe no one has noticed it started to migrate south? The throne room fell into a silence so profound you could hear the pollen settling on the marble. Lord Bromley's hand flew to his head, his face a mask of crimson horror. He patted his toupee, which was, in fact, slightly askew. Sage stared. The king stared, a look of faint confusion on his own face, as if his mouth had just acted of its own accord. He looked at Sage, a dawning horror in his eyes. Did I just say that out loud? Sage could only nod, her own horror mounting. You did, Your Majesty. Why? I believe, she whispered, the terrible, awful truth crashing down on her, that I may have accidentally cursed you. He stared at her, the full weight of her words sinking in. You cursed me? Based on the evidence at hand, with brutal, unrelenting honesty. The wards, they're truth-bound at their foundation. The spell must have carried that resonance into me. Yes. She was already rummaging through her satchel, her hands shaking. I can fix this. I can reverse it. Just hold that thought, hold all your thoughts, don't talk to anyone. She pulled out a vial of nullification powder, a basic counteragent for misfired spells, and began tracing a reversal sigil in the air. The powder glowed, the sigil formed, and Sage pushed the dispelling energy towards the king with every ounce of focus she had. The magic hit him and bounced, not gently, not like a spell fizzling. It rebounded like a ball thrown at a stone wall and slammed back into Sage with enough force to make her stagger. Her mouth opened of its own accord. Oh gods, you're even more intimidating up close, and I genuinely cannot tell if I'm terrified or attracted, and this is the worst day of my professional life. The words hung in the air. Sage clapped both hands over her mouth, her eyes wide with absolute horror. The rebound had carried a fragment of the truth binding into her. It faded after a few agonizing seconds, but the damage was done. Oliver stared at her. She stared at him. Bromley, still clutching his wig, stared at both of them. She said, attracted. I heard it. She said, attracted. I would like this on the record. So, Oliver said slowly, strangling the wolf's enthusiasm through sheer force of will, the curse has set. Like magical concrete, I need an actual antidote, not just a reversal. This is going to take research. Oliver's jaw tightened. He looked at the horrified Bromley, then at the trembling servant, then back at Sage. He took a deep breath, clearly intending to unleash a torrent of royal fury. Instead, he said, This is, without a doubt, the single most inconvenient and professionally catastrophic thing that has ever happened to me. And yet, there is a small, deeply inappropriate part of me that is morbidly curious to see what I say next. We could tell her about the den. I have been designing it. There are furs. Oliver closed his eyes. It was going to be a very long day. They didn't make it to the private council chamber without incident. The corridor from the throne room to the king's private wing was, under normal circumstances, a 30-second walk. On this particular morning, it might as well have been a minefield paved with conversational tripwires. The first mine was Sir Aldous Pemberton, captain of the Royal Guard, who rounded a corner at precisely the wrong moment. He was a broad, loyal man who had served the crown for 20 years and who had exactly one question on his mind. Your Majesty, I heard a commotion. Are you well? Oliver opened his mouth. Sage lunged for his arm. Too late. Physically, I am fine, Aldous. Mentally, I have been cursed by a witch who sneezed on me. But more pressingly, you've been captain for 2 decades, and you still hold your sword like you're stirring porridge. I've watched you spar. It's like watching a wardrobe fight a hat stand. The only reason our guard is effective is because your lieutenant does all the actual tactical work, and you take the credit, which you know, and which keeps you up at night, and I can see it in the bags under your eyes. Sir Aldous stood very still. His hand drifted to his sword hilt, then drifted away, then drifted back. Sage grabbed Oliver by the sleeve and physically dragged him around the corner. Move, now, before he recovers. I didn't mean to say that. I know. He really does hold his sword like he's stirring. I know that too, but you can't just... She is touching our arm. She is pulling us. This is the best day of our life. I would like to be dragged around corners by Sunhair every day, forever. They turned the next corner and nearly collided with Lady Whitfield, an elderly dowager who served on the charity council and who had, unfortunately, a habit of asking personal questions. "Oh, Your Majesty, what a lovely surprise! Tell me, how are you feeling today? You look a bit peaky. Is everything quite—" "Lady Whitfield, I feel as though my skull has been colonized by an honest parasite. Your perfume smells like a funeral home that's given up on subtlety, and I have always privately believed that your charity galas raise less money than they cost because you spend half the budget on ice sculptures that look like they're melting from embarrassment. Good day." He seized Sage's arm this time, and they ran, actually ran, the remaining distance to the private wing, the sound of Lady Whitfield's stunned gasp echoing behind them. Leanne, who had been trailing them with the expression of a man watching his life's work burn in real time, caught up and slammed the heavy oak door shut behind all three of them. "So," Leanne said, breathing hard, "the retreat plan. Let's discuss that immediately." Oliver was leaning against the wall, his eyes closed. "Lady Whitfield's ice sculptures. Yes, they do look like they're melting from embarrassment." "They really do. That's not the point." It was Leanne who took control. Oliver's beta and oldest friend, he was the kind of man who had contingency plans for his contingency plans. He paced the length of the council chamber, working through the logistics with military efficiency. "You go into private council. Indefinite retreat. It happens. Kings do it. You're reviewing military strategy, restructuring the border response, whatever story plays. All public audiences are suspended. The Southern Trade delegation gets pushed back a week. I'll manage the court. And if someone walks in and asks me a direct question?" Sage, who had been quietly spiraling in the corner, spoke up. "He can't lie about the curse. If anyone asks, 'Are you well?' he'll tell them the truth. And once the court knows it's a curse, every honest thing he's said becomes political ammunition. People will start asking him questions on purpose, about rivals, about secrets, about who's embezzling what. He becomes a weapon anyone can aim." "She's right. If this gets out, every ambitious lord in the kingdom lines up to ask me what I really think of their enemies." "You oblivious to politics. Sunhair is smart. Tell her she is smart. Also tell her about the den. I have added a fireplace." "So the retreat serves two purposes," Leanne said. "You stay hidden, and Sage stays close to work on the cure. Skeleton staff only. I control access. No one gets through the door without my say-so." He looked at Sage. "How long?" "I don't know. This isn't a standard curse. It's ward amplification magic fused with truth-binding resonance and filtered through dragon's breath pepper and human sinuses. It's bespoke. Magically speaking, yes." "Wonderful." He pointed at Sage. "You fix him." He pointed at Oliver. "You don't talk to anyone you don't have to. And if I have to, then for the love of the moon, keep your sentences short." The first 2 days of the retreat were almost manageable. The private wing of the palace was quiet. The skeleton staff had been selected by Leanne for their discretion and, more importantly, their tendency not to ask personal questions. Meals were delivered by a silent valet named Colum, who seemed constitutionally incapable of small talk. The guards at the door had been instructed to face outward and pretend the king didn't exist. Sage set up a makeshift research lab in the council chamber, surrounded by towers of books hauled from the royal library. She worked through grimoire after grimoire, searching for a countercurse. Most countercurses, she found, required ingredients that hadn't existed for centuries, or rituals that needed a coven of 12, or conditions so absurd they read like jokes. One required the willing silence of a politician. Another called for a dragon's honest opinion of itself. A third demanded she collect the echo of an apology from someone who has never been wrong. She was, she realized with growing dread, looking for a needle in a haystack the size of a kingdom, and the haystack was on fire. But even in retreat, a king cannot be fully isolated. The machinery of state demanded attention, and certain people had access by necessity. The first casualty came on day 2. Bartholomew, the royal treasurer, could not be put off. The quarterly budget required the king's seal, retreat or no retreat. He arrived with his parchments, his meticulous columns, and the quiet confidence of a man who believed numbers were the only honest language. Oliver studied the figures for approximately 30 seconds. Bartholomew, these numbers suggest you believe money grows on trees that you are currently failing to locate. Your grasp of economics is, frankly, breathtakingly incompetent. I've seen squirrels with a more robust financial plan. Bartholomew set the parchment down with exaggerated care, as though handling explosives. He straightened his waistcoat, inclined his head exactly 1 degree, and said, I see. If your Majesty will excuse me, I believe I have some squirrels to consult. He left the room with the measured dignity of a man who was absolutely going to rewrite the entire budget overnight out of pure, seething spite. Sage stared at the closed door, then at Oliver, then at Leanne, who was already writing in a small notebook he'd started carrying. What are you doing? Documenting. For posterity. That was art. Day 3 brought the duck. Chef Renaud, the man responsible for the king's formal dining, brought the evening meal himself. He was a proud man, tall and thin, with the intense focus of someone who believed cuisine was a calling rather than a profession. His duck l'orange was legendary. Foreign dignitaries had wept over it. He presented it with a small, expectant bow. Oliver took 1 bite, chewed, swallowed. A complicated expression crossed his face, the expression of a man whose mouth was about to commit a crime his taste buds hadn't authorized. Renaud, this duck tastes like a bird that drowned its sorrows in a vat of marmalade and then gave up on life. The sauce is committing a war crime against citrus. I've had more complex flavors from a boiled handkerchief. Renaud's mustache trembled. He stood perfectly still for a long, dangerous moment, and then did something nobody expected. He picked up the plate, examined it critically, took a small taste of the sauce himself, and said, The orange reduction. I knew. I have known for months. It is tired. The recipe is tired. I have been serving a memory, not a meal. He looked at Oliver with an expression that was part fury, part gratitude, and part the wild-eyed look of a man about to burn down everything he'd built. You are a barbarian, Your Majesty, but you are not wrong. He took the plate and left. Sage watched him go, something complicated twisting in her chest. The moment had been funny. Oliver's face during the critique, the trembling mustache, the dramatic self-examination. But underneath it was a man reckoning with 30 years of work, and that wasn't funny at all. That wasn't as fun as I expected it to be, Oliver said quietly. No, Sage agreed. It wasn't. Leanne looked up from his notebook, his pen hovering. For the first time, he didn't write anything down. Day 4 was when the curse stopped being funny altogether. It started with Nella, a young serving girl who brought the morning tea. She was new to the palace staff, 16, nervous, and utterly unprepared. She set the tray down, bobbed a curtsy, and made the fatal error of making eye contact with the king. Will there be anything else, Your Majesty? Oliver didn't even try to answer the question. The curse had been building pressure behind every safe, short interaction, and Nella's wide, earnest eyes triggered something he hadn't been able to say to anyone with the authority to hear it. Yes, you can tell the head housekeeper that the staff quarters on the north side are drafty, underfurnished, and a disgrace. I've known about it for 2 years and I've done nothing because it wasn't politically important. You deserve better, and the fact that none of you have complained says more about this court's failures than any budget report. Nella's eyes filled with tears, not because she'd been insulted, because she'd been seen. She backed out of the room clutching the tray with the stiff terror of someone who'd just been addressed by a god. An hour later, Sage found her crying in the corridor outside the kitchens. Nobody's ever, Nella kept saying, unable to finish the sentence. And the quarters really are cold, but nobody ever. Sage sat with her until she stopped crying. Then she walked back to the council chamber with a stone in her chest that had nothing to do with politics, and everything to do with the small human wreckage that a curse like this left in its wake. The truth, it turned out, could break people open in more ways than insult. Then came Fenwick. Lord Fenwick, a minor noble with access to the inner council, arrived that afternoon with his annual report on border taxation. Oliver listened for approximately 30 seconds before the curse delivered its verdict. Your numbers are fabricated, Fenwick. You've been skimming from the border tariffs for at least 2 seasons. Everyone suspects it. No one says it because your wife is on the charity council, and they're afraid of her. Fenwick went white. He set his papers down, stood, and left without a word. By evening, his wife had locked herself in their chambers and refused to see anyone. Day 5. The Wine Incident. The palace wine steward, a small, nervous man named Phelps, had been avoiding the private wing entirely. But a question had arisen about the cellar inventory that could not be resolved through notes under the door, and Leanne had reluctantly granted him 5 minutes. Phelps entered with the cautious body language of a man approaching a bear he'd been told was friendly. He clutched a wine ledger to his chest like a shield, and addressed his question to a point approximately 3 feet to the left of the king's actual face. Your Majesty, the 87 vintage. There's a dispute about whether to serve it at the upcoming state dinner or continue aging it. The cellar master believes the 87 vintage tastes like someone explained the concept of grapes to a puddle and then bottled the puddle's confusion. It should be served immediately. To our enemies. Sage, who had been reading a grimoire on counterhexes, made a noise that was half gasp, half laugh. She clamped a hand over her mouth, but it was too late. Oliver looked at her, and for the first time since the curse had landed, something in his expression cracked. Not with horror or shame, but with genuine, helpless amusement. His mouth twitched. Then it twitched again. And then the Alpha King let out a laugh. Not the polished, controlled chuckle of a king at a state dinner. A real laugh. The kind that creased his eyes and showed his teeth and made him look, for one unguarded moment, like a man who remembered what joy felt like. Deep in his chest, the wolf went absolutely still. Not the restless pacing stillness of the past few days. A different kind. The kind of stillness that happens when an animal recognizes something sacred. She made us laugh. We haven't laughed like that in years. Keep her. Whatever it takes, keep her. Oliver ignored the wolf. He laughed. Sage started laughing too, and then they were both laughing, breathless and absurd, while Phelps stood frozen with his wine ledger and the kingdom quietly crumbled outside their sealed doors. Serve to our enemies, Sage wheezed, wiping her eyes. That's actually brilliant foreign policy. I am a man of vision, Oliver said solemnly, and then ruined it by laughing again. Phelps cleared his throat. So, shall I mark the 87 for the state dinner then? No, Phelps. That wine deserves a military funeral, not a dinner party. Bury it in the south cellar and tell no one where the body is. Phelps left wide-eyed. Sage was still laughing, and Oliver was watching her laugh with an expression that had nothing to do with curses, and everything to do with a man discovering that someone else's joy could feel like coming home. And yet, between the laughter and the wreckage, something quieter was building. They were in the council chamber on the 5th evening. Sage was cross-referencing 2 texts on sympathetic resonance, muttering to herself, and Oliver was sitting across the table, pretending to read a military dispatch while his eyes kept drifting. The northern garrison needs reinforcements. Then, without any transition whatsoever, and your focus when you're thinking is incredibly compelling, you get a small furrow between your brows. It's absurdly endearing. Sage's quill stopped moving. She looked up. There was no council to deflect to, no room full of people to spin a creative interpretation for. Just the 2 of them and the firelight. The curse, she said carefully. The curse, he confirmed. My apologies. She went back to her books. Her heart was hammering. Her internal monologue was doing something unhelpful. He said, endearing. The Alpha King said the word endearing about your forehead wrinkle. This is fine. This is completely fine. Focus on the sympathetic resonance. Sympathetic resonance. The resonance is very sympathetic. Shut up, brain. Later that same night, she was explaining the theoretical principles of resonance inversion while Oliver leaned over the same text, their heads close together over the cramped handwriting of a 300-year-old alchemist. He stopped mid-sentence, his nostrils flaring slightly. Is that rosemary? In your hair? I use a rosemary rinse for strengthening. It suits you. It smells like the garden at my family's old hunting lodge. It smells like peace. Then he recoiled as if burned, shoving back from the table. I did not mean to say that. The curse is invasive. Yes, you mentioned. They sat on opposite sides of the table for the rest of the night, a careful 6 feet of oak between them. It didn't help. The next morning, Sage arrived early to find Oliver studying a map of the western border. His collar was sitting crooked. Leanne hadn't arrived yet. Without thinking, operating on the same instinct that made her tuck lavender behind her ear and straighten crooked picture frames, she reached up and adjusted it. Her fingers brushed the warm skin of his neck. They both went completely still. She was close enough to see the flecks of amber in his dark eyes, close enough to feel the tension radiating off him like heat from a forge, close enough to hear his breath catch. Neither of them spoke. Neither of them moved. The moment stretched, gossamer thin, and Sage had the irrational, terrifying thought that if she didn't step back right now, she might never want to. Oliver's wolf, who had no concept of restraint, subtlety, or timing, chose this precise moment to unleash a full symphonic howl of longing directly into Oliver's nervous system. Mate, she is touching us. Her fingers are on our neck. This is it. This is the moment. Claim her. Bond with her. At minimum, tell her about the den. I have added a second fireplace and a reading nook because she likes books. A door slammed somewhere down the corridor and they sprang apart like they'd been caught stealing. Your collar was... Thank you. They did not discuss it. The wolf sulked for the rest of the morning. Leanne, naturally, had been keeping score. I've been ranking them, he announced on the evening of day 5, flipping through his notebook at dinner. Category 1. Politically devastating. Top entry, the Pemberton Sword Critique. Category 2. Culinarily offensive. Winner by a landslide, the Duck Obituary. Category 3. He paused, and his smirk turned into something almost gentle. Accidentally romantic. Now this category has been showing unexpected growth. The rosemary comment is strong, but the distracting in a way that feels like hope line is currently in the lead. Leanne? I'm a historian, Oliver. I document. It's my sacred duty. He turned to Sage, his expression mock serious. You should know that in 20 years of friendship, I had never heard this man use the word endearing in any context. You've expanded his vocabulary. The kingdom thanks you. This isn't funny, Leanne. Nella cried for an hour, not because he was cruel, but because he was kind, and that's somehow worse. Fenwick's wife won't speak to him, and Chef Renaud has reportedly locked himself in the kitchen and is disassembling every recipe he's ever written. Leanne's grin faded. He closed the notebook. I know it's not all funny. He was quiet for a moment. But Sage, the staff who've heard him, the ones who aren't crying, they're sort of stunned. He told the head groundskeeper that the North Garden looks like nature's way of apologizing for trying. The man laughed so hard he had to sit down. Then he redesigned the entire garden in 2 days. Bartholomew's rewritten budget came back this morning. It's the best fiscal plan this kingdom has seen in a decade. That doesn't make it okay. No, but it means his honesty isn't all destruction. He hesitated, and for the first time the sardonic mask slipped. In 20 years, Sage, I have never once heard Oliver laugh at his own joke. He did today, with you. I didn't know his face could do that. The retreat held for 6 days. On the 7th, it broke. The rumors had been building. Archbishop Thaddeus, who had somehow heard a third-hand account of the nap time with extra steps comment, had begun preaching pointed homilies about kings who lose their divine mandate. He never mentioned Oliver by name. He didn't have to. The congregation grew every morning. And then Lady Marin of the Greywood Pack arrived. She had not been invited. She arrived at the palace gates with a small retinue and the unassailable authority of being the daughter of Alpha Aldrich, whose territory formed the entire western buffer between the kingdom and 3 hostile border clans. The alliance with Aldrich was load-bearing, and everyone had understood for years that Meryn and Oliver would one day formalize it through a political bond. Leanne tried to stop her. She walked past him with the calm certainty of a woman who knew exactly how much leverage she held. What made Meryn dangerous was that she wasn't a villain. She was genuinely capable. She ran her father's trade negotiations and had secured 3 territorial agreements in the past year alone. She was courteous to servants. Sage watched her thank a footman by name as she entered. Her flaw was not cruelty, it was precision. She looked at the world, at people, at Oliver, and saw chess pieces. She entered the private council chamber flanked by 2 of her own people, witnesses, Sage realized with a sinking feeling. Whatever happened next would not stay in this room. Oliver's wolf, who had been dozing contentedly after an afternoon of staring at Sage's brow furrow, snapped to attention. He assessed the new arrival with the dispassionate efficiency of a predator evaluating a non-threat. Who is this? She smells like expensive soap and strategy. Not mate. Not interesting. Where did Sunhair go? His attention slid off Meryn like water off stone and returned to tracking Sage across the room. Meryn surveyed the scene. The king at a table, the witch surrounded by spellbooks, the air thick with the smell of alchemical compounds and rosemary. Her gaze lingered on Sage with the brief, efficient assessment of someone cataloging a potential variable. Oliver, she said, not darling, not my king. Just his name, which was somehow more proprietary than either. I heard the court was experiencing some unusual candor. I wanted to see for myself. She circled the room with the calm appraisal of someone evaluating a property. She picked up one of Sage's open grimoires, read the chapter heading, On the Reversal of Involuntary Candor, and set it down again. Ah, a truth curse. How inconvenient. She turned back to Oliver. Father is concerned. The western passes need attention and rumors travel fast. I thought I could help, a steady presence. She paused. You know I've always been willing to stand beside you, Oliver. A strong alpha needs a strong Luna. Someone who understands the weight of a crown. She meant it. She genuinely believed she was the right choice, not out of love, but out of conviction. She had the skills, the bloodline, the instincts. She saw the match as a logical equation, and in every calculation, she was the answer. Then she turned to Sage, and with a polite smile that managed to make witch sound like temporary inconvenience, said, I'm sure Miss Wren has been doing her best, but perhaps it's time for a more permanent solution to the king's needs. The wolf's head came up, not because of the political implications, because the expensive soap woman had just looked at Sunhair like she was furniture. The wolf didn't growl, he was too dignified for that, but something cold and ancient shifted behind Oliver's ribs, and when the curse opened its floodgates, the wolf was standing right behind the dam. Meryn, your entrance was impressive. You walked past my beta, my guards, and my explicit wish for privacy with the casual authority of someone who believes doors are suggestions. It was genuinely well executed. I almost admired it. A flicker of uncertainty crossed Meryn's face. The almost hung in the air. But I need you to hear something. I respect your competence. I always have. You are, without question, the most strategically valuable match I could make. And that is exactly the problem. The room went still. Every conversation we have ever had has been a negotiation. You don't see a man on this throne. You see a position, an asset, a merger. You have never once asked me what I think about anything that doesn't affect a border or a trade route. In 10 years of knowing you, you have never once made me laugh. My wolf would rather live feral in the northern woods, eating rabbits and sleeping in the mud, than be bonded to someone who looks at a kingdom and sees a ledger. You are brilliant, Meryn, and being near you makes me feel like a line item. The silence that followed was not the theatrical silence of a shocked court. It was the intimate, unbearable silence of a small room where something real had been broken. Meryn stood very still. She did not crumble. She did not storm out. But Sage saw it, a flicker across her face that lasted less than a second and contained more genuine pain than anything the curse had produced in a week. The wound of a woman who had built her entire identity on being the logical answer and had just been told that logic wasn't what was wanted. "I see. Thank you for your candor, Oliver." She turned and left the council chamber. She didn't slam the door. The quiet click of the latch was worse. 2 witnesses, every word carried to Aldrich within the week. The containment was blown. Leanne materialized in the doorway seconds later. "Tell me that didn't just happen." "I couldn't stop it." Oliver sank into his chair, pressing the heels of his hands against his eyes. "You have to fix him, Sage, before Aldrich hears the details. When he does, he'll pull his border patrols from the western passes and let the clans know we're no longer under his protection." The weight of it all fell on Sage. She saw Marin's face, the flicker underneath the composure. She saw Nella crying in the corridor. She saw Renaud staring at his own sauce. She felt the full, accumulated weight of every truth the curse had delivered. And she had caused all of it with a single, stupid sneeze. "I'll find it. I'll find the cure, tonight." She worked without stopping. She ignored the food trays. She ignored the knocks. She just worked, cross-referencing ancient texts until her vision blurred. It was some time past midnight when she heard him enter the chamber. She didn't look up. She couldn't. If she looked at him, she'd think about the way his voice had gone quiet on the word peace, and then she wouldn't be able to think at all. "You should sleep." "Can't." Silence. The fire crackled. She turned a page. Another dead end. "Maybe it's for the best." "What?" He was standing at the window, staring out at the moonlit gardens. "Maybe you're not meant to find a cure." "Your Majesty, Marin's witnesses are probably halfway to the Greywood by now. Thaddeus is preaching to a growing crowd. Aldrich is going to pull his patrols the moment—" "I know what Aldrich is going to do." Thaddeus always did prefer the slow knife. He walked closer, stopping on the other side of the massive oak table. The firelight caught his face, and underneath the granite and the kingship, Sage saw a man who was tired of performing, and had been given, against his will, the terrifying gift of not being able to pretend anymore. "I've never felt more like myself, Sage." She stared at him. His eyes were clear and serious. "My entire life has been a performance. The Alpha King. Stoic, unflinching, decisive. I spend all day, every day, wearing a mask so heavy I sometimes forget what my own face feels like." He gestured vaguely at his own chest. "You sneezed it right off. And for a week, locked in these rooms with you, I've been more honest than I've been in my entire life. It's terrifying. And it's the first time I've felt real." He paused. Sage saw him fighting it, saw the muscles in his jaw tighten, saw his hands grip the back of a chair. But the curse was patient, and the truth was heavier than his grip. "My wolf recognized you the moment you walked into my throne room. He called you mate before you'd finished your curtsy. He's been calling you mate every day since, and every day I've told him to be quiet, and every day he has not been quiet. Because he has never once in his life been quiet about anything, and he is not about to start now." Sage's breath stopped. Mate. The word detonated in her chest. In wolf shifter culture, a mate bond wasn't a crush. It wasn't a choice. It was a soul-deep recognition, biological and spiritual and irreversible. Alphas waited their entire lives for it. Some never felt it at all. "He named you Sunhair," Oliver said, and a ghost of mortification crossed his face, as though the confession were being extracted tooth by tooth. "He's been designing a den. There are apparently 2 fireplaces and a reading nook. He is the most powerful predatory instinct on this continent, and he has been mentally decorating a living room for a week. Despite everything, despite the crumbling kingdom and the political crisis, and the fact that her chest was so tight she couldn't breathe properly, Sage felt a laugh trying to claw its way out of her throat. A reading nook. The wolf had added a reading nook for her. And I'm terrified of you fixing this. Because then I'll have to go back to pretending. I'll have to pretend I don't think about the way your brow furrows when you're reading. I'll have to pretend I don't listen for your footsteps in the hall. I'll have to pretend that my wolf doesn't go quiet, actually quiet, for the first time in my life, when you're in the room. His voice dropped to barely a whisper. I'll have to pretend I'm not falling in love with you. The confession hung in the air between them, more potent than any spell. Sage's heart stopped. Her internal monologue, her witty armor, shattered into a million pieces. This wasn't a stray compliment. This was everything. Mate bond, love, terror, truth, delivered in firelight by a man who couldn't lie even if he wanted to. And the wolf who had designed a den with a reading nook because she liked books. The wolf who had whispered, "Keep her," after she'd made them laugh. The wolf was the truest part of all of it. Somewhere beneath the shock, beneath the panic, beneath the professional guilt and the voice screaming, "This is a workplace hazard," Sage felt a quieter truth settle into her bones. She had been happier in this chaotic, sealed-off, impossible week than she had been in years. Happier arguing over grimoires at midnight and laughing about puddle wine and adjusting his collar in the morning light. Happier being needed, not for her magic, but for her presence. And that terrified her more than any curse. Before she could speak, he seemed to catch himself. He took a half step back, his expression shuddering. The curse, it exaggerates. But Sage had seen his eyes. The curse didn't exaggerate. It just told the truth. A sharp knock at the door shattered the moment. Leanne entered, grim-faced. Aldrich received word. His scouts are pulling back from the western passes. The clans will know by morning. Oliver strode from the room, already issuing orders. The vulnerable man vanished. The king returned. Sage stood alone in the firelight, one hand pressed against her chest. She made a decision. Not because the kingdom needed the cure, because if Oliver couldn't say those words without the curse forcing them out, they would never mean what she needed them to mean. She needed to know if any of it was real. She dove back into the books. And finally, in the darkest hour before dawn, she found it. Not in one of the famous grimoires, but in a water-damaged notebook crammed behind a shelf, written in a dialect so archaic she'd walked past it 3 times. The handwriting was spidery and faded. The title read, Remedies for Magical Afflictions of the Tongue, being a practical guide for the correction of involuntary candor, by one Hedda Ashvane. An Ashvane, a witch in Oliver's own ancestral line. The truth wards hadn't just been built for the throne room. They'd been built by someone who understood intimately the danger of too much honesty. And she'd written down the cure. The counter-curse required a complex potion and one final critical ingredient, a single perfect petal from a moon petal flower, which only bloomed under the light of a waning crescent moon, and only if watered with a tear shed in genuine sorrow for harm caused by truth spoken without mercy. Under the sliver of a crescent moon, Sage found the delicate, silvery flowers in the royal greenhouse. She thought of Renaud staring at his own sauce, with the eyes of a man whose life's work had just been autopsied. She thought of Fenwick's wife locked in her chambers. She thought of Nella crying not because she'd been hurt, but because she'd been seen. She thought of Marin's face, the fraction of a second where a woman who had never been found lacking was told she wasn't enough. She thought of Sir Aldous, who held his sword like he was stirring porridge and who would lie awake tonight knowing his king had noticed. A single hot tear fell from her eye and landed on the soil. One of the flowers unfurled, glowing with soft internal light. She plucked one perfect petal and rushed back to her lab. The potion turned from murky brown to shimmering silver as the petal dissolved. The cure. She poured it into a crystal vial and stared at it. Her hands were shaking. This was the end of King Oliver the Honest. The end of laughing about puddle wine at midnight. The end of a wolf who designed dens with reading nooks. She steadied her resolve and walked towards the king's private study. He was at the window again, looking out at the kingdom he was in danger of losing. He'd been up all night, too. He didn't turn. You found it. I have it. She held out the vial. The cure. He turned. His eyes were dark, filled with something that looked like grief. He looked at the vial, then at her. A long moment. Maybe leave it for one more day. One more day? Aldrich has pulled his patrols. The clans are moving. Thaddeus is preaching to a bigger crowd every morning. We don't have one more day. He walked over and reached for the vial, then stopped. If this kills me, at least the last face I see will be yours. And the curse won't let me lie about that being a comfort. It's not going to kill you. I'm 87% sure. Your percentages have not historically inspired confidence. Drink the potion, Oliver. It was the first time she'd used his name. They both heard it. His eyes softened. He took the vial, his fingers brushing hers. He uncorked it, drank it in one motion, and closed his eyes. Inside him, the curse began to dissolve. The truth-binding magic unwound from his bones, and as it went, the wolf felt it. The tide pulling back, the compulsive honesty draining away. For a week, the wolf had ridden the curse like a wave, howling every truth he'd been storing for years. Now the wave was receding, and there was a moment, a single suspended heartbeat, where the wolf could have fought it, could have clung to the curse that let him speak. He didn't. He settled. Slowly, like a great animal lying down by a fire after a long hunt. The frantic energy was gone. In its place was something calm, something sure. He had said what needed saying. He had shown the human what the human was too stubborn to see alone. The rest was up to them. Keep her. One last time. Quiet now. No capitals, no shouting. Just a creature who had found his home and trusted his other half to do the same. Oliver opened his eyes. They were the same intense, dark eyes, but the raw, unfiltered energy was gone, replaced by kingly composure. The mask was back. A terrible, hollow feeling opened in Sage's chest. She cleared her throat. So, Lord Bromley's wig. Your thoughts? Oliver considered the question. A small, polite smile touched his lips. Lord Bromley is a valued and exceptionally stylish member of my court. It worked. Thank the goddess, it worked. She had fixed him. She had saved the kingdom. She felt nothing but a profound, aching emptiness. Oliver looked at her. The mask was perfect. He was the king again, and she was just the witch who worked for him. Sage. His voice was serious. All the forced honesty was gone, replaced by something deeper, something chosen. Yes, Your Majesty? I love you. Her brain short-circuited. Her internal monologue, which had been mournfully packing its bags, erupted into a 5-alarm fire drill. Wait, what? No. Is it a side effect? Did I brew it wrong? Did I accidentally curse him to be in love with me? That's so much worse. That's 1,000 times worse. She lunged for her satchel. Wait, no, don't move. Is your tongue numb? Are you seeing shimmering lights? Do you have an overwhelming urge to tell the truth about the tapestries in this hall? Maybe the moon petal concentration was off. It could induce emotional transference or hallucinatory affections. Oliver watched her. A slow, gentle smile spread across his face. Not the pained smile of the king, nor the wry smile of the truth-teller. This one was all his. He reached out and gently caught her flailing hands. Sage. Her head snapped up. The tapestries are fine. My tongue is fine, and I'm not seeing any lights. He squeezed her hands. Except for the ones that have been in your eyes since the moment I met you. He took a breath. I love you. That wasn't the curse speaking. The curse just made me realize how pointless it was to keep fighting it. My wolf knew from the first moment. It took my very stubborn human brain a bit longer. He says, finally, by the way. He wants you to know about the den. Apparently, there's a reading nook. Sage stared at him, her eyes bright, her hands trembling in his. The witty armor, the deflection, the internal monologue, all of it was failing her. For once in her life, she had no clever spin, no emergency interpretation of events. So she did the most terrifying thing she'd ever done. She told the truth. "I love you too," she said, and her voice cracked on it, and she didn't care. "And I'm furious about it, because I had a very sensible plan to just be professionally guilty for the rest of my career and never look you directly in the eyes again, and you've completely ruined it. I think I've been in love with you since you raised that stupid, unimpressed eyebrow at my success rate, and this is absolutely a workplace hazard, and I should probably be fired, and the reading nook is the most devastating thing anyone has ever done for me, and I need you to know that." He kissed her, which was, she had to admit, an effective way to stop a witch mid-ramble. 6 months later, life was back to normal. Well, a new normal. A chaotic, slightly too honest, infinitely better normal. Sage was now the official royal magi. Her primary duty was to ensure the castle's magical infrastructure didn't spontaneously combust, a task for which her personal history gave her unique qualifications. She also served as the king's most trusted advisor, a role that mostly involved telling him when he was being a pompous idiot, a service no one else dared to provide. The Western crisis had been resolved through a letter. Oliver had written to Alpha Aldrich directly, not through diplomats, not through channels. He acknowledged the insult to Marin. He did not apologize for the truth of what he'd said, but he apologized for the cruelty of how it was said, and for saying it in front of her own people when it should have been said privately, or not at all. He wrote that the alliance between their territories was not a transaction, but a relationship, and that relationships required honesty even when it was uncomfortable. He proposed a new trade agreement that was, by any measure, more generous than the old one. Aldrich, pragmatic and shrewd, recognized something in the letter he hadn't seen from the Ashvane throne in a generation: sincerity. The border patrols returned within a fortnight. Marin had not returned to court. But Sage heard she'd taken over her father's eastern trade operations and was thriving. Whether she would ever forgive Oliver was another matter. But she was building something of her own now, and Sage hoped, quietly, that it would be enough. Cook Marjorie had come back with a new soup recipe that was, by unanimous consensus, spectacular. Renaud had emerged from his kitchen exile with an entirely reinvented menu that made dignitaries weep for new and better reasons. He and Oliver had reached a grudging mutual respect built on the understanding that honesty, properly applied, could be a form of love. The Fenwick situation had been messier. The tariffs were audited. Fenwick was removed from his post. But Oliver had written the family a private note, acknowledging that having a personal failing exposed publicly was a cruelty no one deserved. His wife had started speaking to him again. It was uncertain and imperfect. That was what truth did. It didn't create neat endings, just honest ones. Sir Aldous Pemberton had enrolled in advanced swordsmanship lessons. He told no one why. Archbishop Thaddeus had grudgingly admitted attendance was up. He and Oliver had reached an unspoken détente. Oliver would attend services and stay awake, and Thaddeus would keep his sermons under 45 minutes. They were at a state dinner, seated side by side at the high table. A visiting duke was droning on about turnip yields. Sage was trying to telepathically communicate her boredom to the centerpiece. Oliver leaned over, his voice a low whisper. "On a scale of 1 to Archbishop Thaddeus, how profoundly boring is this man?" "He's rapidly approaching nap time with extra steps, Your Majesty. We may need to create a diplomatic incident just to escape." He let out a laugh, a real, free laugh that made the Duke falter. The sound was still Sage's favorite in the world. As the dinner progressed, Lord Bromley appeared at the entrance, resplendent in a new waistcoat and what was, unmistakably, a new toupee. This one was slightly larger than the last, a shade of brown that existed nowhere in nature. It sat on his head with the confident defiance of a flag planted on conquered territory. Oliver saw it. Sage saw Oliver see it. She watched as his mouth opened, a reflex, an echo, and then closed. A visible effort, a choice. He nodded at Bromley with a small, controlled smile. Bromley, good evening. You're looking well. Not a lie, not the whole truth, just enough. Sage reached under the table and squeezed his hand. He squeezed back, eyes dancing with the words he was choosing not to say. His wolf, predictably, had no such restraint. That fur on his head is worse than the last one. It looks like a small animal died of confusion. Why does no one tell him? We should tell him. We were better at this when we were cursed. Oliver took a slow breath through his nose and did not tell Bromley about his wig. Growth. Imperfect, hard-won, and absolutely hilarious. He caught Sage's hand under the table, thumb stroking over her knuckles. His wolf settled against his ribs, warm and content. Maid is here. She smells like rosemary and victory. I am pleased. I told you from the first moment, and you didn't listen, and I was right, and you were wrong. And I will remind you of this every day until we die. Also, she is bored. She wants to leave. I can tell. Take her to the gardens. Let her win the race. Oliver squeezed her hand. I believe the gardens require a royal inspection for security purposes. An excellent and strategically vital decision, my king. They excused themselves with polite nods and feigned urgency, slipping out a side door into the cool night air. A moment later, where the king had stood, there was a massive wolf, his coat the color of midnight, his eyes glowing with intelligence and affection. He nudged Sage's hand with his nose, giving a soft whine. Sage laughed, scratching him behind the ears. All right, you big simp. Let's go. She didn't need magic to keep up anymore. She ran, and he ran beside her. A king and a witch. A wolf and his mate. Their path lit by the moon. It was chaotic. It was unconventional. And it was utterly, perfectly theirs.